I think we can put the lights down again as well. I'm the architect in the bunch, and I'm all pictures pretty much. So, thank you very much, Carol. Great to see everybody else here. We got engaged in Wall Street, although as residents of New York, certainly kind of knew and loved the history and tended to avoid it because it's incredible pedestrian overload in its boom time years. And it was actually post 9/11 that we got involved to come in and begin to investigate what the physical conditions and the physical realities were of the streetscape and the security issues of that time. And we'll see a few of the maps carrying on. And really, prior to 9/11, the financial district was very, very much integrated into the rest of lower Manhattan. Boundaries had been consumed over the years. Streets ran through, traffic moved. There were some security issues or other things, but indeed it was a neighborhood knit into all of lower Manhattan. And one of the most drastic issues that came out was this potential isolation, the separation, a sort of mandated security blanket to begin considering the long-term iconic and economic impacts of a potential incident at the stock exchange. And so we're given kind of like the project you almost hate to get, which is how do you sever a piece of the city to save it, in a way. And this is what we inherit, as you've seen in many pictures, a complete consumption of public space by the security concerns. And so we began to engage with the Downtown Alliance, with city planning, LMDC, EDC, the probably every agency in the city, one way or another, from PD to fire department, to how to begin to retake some of the public space. I'm sure Mr. Swig can speak later, but as we began to be involved, a lot of the concerns that came out of the Alliance and intensive stakeholder groups were the fundamental loss of tenants, as Liz referred to, people's concern that they were not going to renew leases. People didn't want to come down here. Tourists were concerned they couldn't get close. And the kind of collection of security debris, in effect, that was gathering. And, one of the staggeringly unfortunate things about security is it only seems to go one way. It's kind of an increased situation, never a decreased situation. And most of the corners were confronted with this thing. The iconic corner of Wall Street and Broad was actually down to a single 3.5-foot lane for pedestrians on the north side. Almost impassable for the sort of population that existed trying to move in and out of the district through this one tiny hole on Broadway. So one of our first efforts was to tackle some of the debris that had gathered, which was everything from the Jersey barriers to subsequent planters that had been put in place, the assembly of pieces trying to aggregate to provide some sort of measure of security, and made a very relatively simple move, which is to say, if there's a certain amount of mass required, then how small can that mass become, and how handsome can that mass possibly become, which led to an agreement we made with the Army Corps of Engineers for some testing and developed the no-go, which you walk past tonight, a series of bronze elements that borrow materially from the history of the district, but certainly with their form and sculptural impact, look to the century of occupancy that is there now. So one of the first efforts was to sort of regain that iconic doorway to Wall Street in front of Trinity Church, open it up to pedestrians, and simply make the district available again. And we were delighted at one point because the no-goes were chosen for an exhibition up at MoMA, and it engaged us in a nice sort of philosophical conversation about the boundary of, was it sculpture, was it architecture, and we always felt very sure in saying, well, these are easily architecture because they have a fundamental piece of program to provide that security. But there were larger urban scale issues to confront, not just this sort of immediacy of pedestrian access. And that is, as referenced by some of the historical material presented, one of the most consequential view corridors in the city anywhere, and certainly in the historic part of Manhattan, where you can stand on Broadway, which was the ridge of the original island, at Trinity, and see all the way to the East River, and similarly for the East River to see all the way back to Trinity. And this has been photographed over and over. And just a reminder that American flags have been a common adornment for this district. But this was that sort of iconic corridor that Carol referenced. And unfortunately, it really got locked up in this response. And this was one of the most difficult ones because given our work with NYPD and counterterrorism, and what they felt the extraordinary elevated height of concern and risk, they were really unwilling to accept anything other than long-tested series of devices and elements that were in the street. And most of those, came from military installations or other places that were anything but the heart of a pedestrian urban district. So we sought something to say, well, how are we going to confront this? Part of the problem was there's just so much bloody stuff under the street that trying to get anything down and into the street in any way was nearly impossible. And so we looked both backwards and forward to technologies from other realms, the turntables that have rotated locomotives for centuries, operating in all kinds of weather, all times of year, and had the capacity to be very thin for very high performance. For those of you who don't know, this is the turntable under the stage at the Metropolitan Opera. It's about 9 inches thick. And if you've seen the right show, you've seen an elephant rotate on there, so it can hold a lot. And so we sort of adapted that series of device to a new purpose, which is to security, to retake the street, and embedded those series of turntables to try and recover the pedestrian walkway and this fundamental view corridor that is at the heart of Lower Manhattan. The other piece of Wall Street, which has been alluded to and sort of show you in a series of maps, which is, of course, its namesake is the fabulous idea that once there was this northern boundary, this palisade of logs, a stockade that was put up over a series of decades, whether it was to repel Indians or potential British invasions, and maintained in different ways. And it wandered a little bit, but most of our research showed it generally tending to occur along Wall Street, most of the time a sort of early frontier stockade. And we felt that if we were going to engage in the security apparatus of the city, it was as fundamentally important to engage in the history and character of the street itself. So we introduced a series of wooden blocks you can go out and see just quietly inlaid into the pavement that marked that original line of the stockade on Wall Street, so that we not only recovered that fundamental corridor of Lower Manhattan with Trinity Church at its apex, but we also mark the character and the history that was a part of the making of this street. And we are really delighted that the elements that have come from originally the world of security with a right level of sort of design and not quite 400 years of innovation, but the project seemed that long at times, is actually embrace an incredibly broad constituency and begin to overcome this challenge of security as a social criteria. And lastly, I am not go ahead and roll it. I'm not a TV guy, but somebody sent this to us the other day, and I realized if you give me just a moment, you're cued by the title there, of course, and our other real estate folks on Wall Street. But the introduction to The Apprentice this year was filmed on Wall Street. I hope it's going to run. And we decided that when the apparatus that had been applied to develop the security perimeter and the boundary for these conditions have been converted into contemporary icons for shows like The Apprentice, then perhaps, at least from the design perspective, we'd made the first touch towards reaching our goal. Thank you.